I'm thrilled that you're joining me here. My name is Marilyn Evans. I'm the founder of Parents Aware and host of the Media Savvy Moms podcast, the podcast that is leading the conversation about parenting and pornography today. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Media Savvy Moms podcast. Today, we will be talking about pornography, of course, as always, but in particular, addiction, adolescence, and how pornography, a little bit about how that impacts the adolescent brain. And to do that, I have Mary Sharpe here with me. She is the chair of the Reward Foundation, which talks about relationships, sex, education, and she founded this charity with her husband, Darryl Mead, in 2014 to make the science behind relationships and sex accessible to a wide audience. And we're so happy that she's here today, and we love those topics, especially that she focuses primarily on the impact of internet pornography on adolescents with regards to their health, relationships, attainment, and because she's a lawyer, how that fits into the law. So Mary has also been on the board of the World Movement of Mothers International to help them shape their communication strategy. So many great things. So glad to have you here, Mary. I'm going to stop talking and let you introduce yourself and what you do.
Okay, Marilyn, thank you so much. And it's a great, great privilege and pleasure to be able to speak to your listeners on this wonderful podcast. So,
I forgot to mention that she's Scottish and she has a charming accent.
Well, I hope you can understand it okay and slow me down and ask me to repeat things if you can't understand. So you'd like to know a little bit about me and the Reward Foundation. So I studied psychology before I took up the law, and I've always been interested in what makes people tick, especially how to make love relationships last long term. Sadly, as a lawyer, I had to deal with a lot of family breakups and criminal law and all the damage that it did around families. So I've always been interested in what can we do further upstream to help families be strong. Now, in 2012, I was asked to help organise the first ever TEDx event in Glasgow in Scotland. Now, probably most of you will know what a TEDx or a TED event is. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd heard about Gary Wilson's successful website, Your Brain on Porn, and suggested him as a speaker. And that was warmly welcomed. And so he came and was incredibly popular. His talk, The Great Porn Experiment, has now had over 13.7 million views.
Wow,
and in
that's talk, incredible.
Isn't it cool?
Mm-hmm.
So in that talk, he mentioned how internet pornography is totally different from pornography of the past in terms of its accessibility, availability, and the fact that it's anonymous. He also mentioned that it's a supernormal stimulus that affects how the brain responds, and in particular is different from normal, healthy, age-appropriate sexual stimuli, and that can lead to erectile dysfunction, even in young men. And also that it's potentially addictive for some people. But here's the good news. Because the brain is plastic, people can recover. And that is so important to know, and it gives people hope and that they're not a lost cause. Now, I thought that was such an important thing for people to know, that this was a health issue and the internet pornography on demand can lead to brain changes, and that it wasn't just a moral issue as such and that somebody's a bad person, although maybe some people view it that way, but basically it's a public health issue. So, as you mentioned, in 2014, I set up the charity with my husband, Dr. Darryl Mead, and we set up the Reward Foundation. And it's called the Reward Foundation because we teach about the brain's reward system. That's the part of the ancient brain that drives us towards pleasure and away from risks.
I'm glad you explained the Reward Foundation, the name, and how that's linked to, because reward can mean a lot of things, but there is a reward center in our brain, or a reward loop, sometimes it's referred to. And it's really important that we understand that as the brain is developing. But we're going to get to that word addiction in just a moment. But I want you to tell us why it's so important, why you and your husband, Dr. Mead, felt it was so important to make this science accessible to everyone. Like how does that protect children from pornography?
Okay. Well, first of all, we don't learn in school about the biological basis of love and bonding. Maybe learn a little bit about reproduction, how to make babies. But we don't really learn about what drives our sexual desire. Now, most parents don't know either, and this can lead to a lot of heartache and confusion, especially today when internet pornography is such a generator of high sexual desire. It's so convenient. And it looks to kids like a good substitute till they're ready for relationships, but it really isn't. And it's the fact that it's this supernormal stimulation on the brain, on this very delicate part of the brain that evolved over millions of years to drive us towards food, towards sex, towards bonding. These are natural rewards. But pornography, internet pornography, is a supernormal version. It's a hyper stimulating version that completely overstimulates the brain. And because it's rewarding, that means rewarding this in the biological sense that this is good for reproductive purposes. Nature's number one priority is reproduction of genes. And to the brain, the primitive brain, pictures and sounds, moans and groans and all the sort of things that they hear with pornography, and all these visuals of people having sex, tells the primitive brain this is a fertilization opportunity. This is a bonanza. This is, this is all you want to be passing on your genes. But the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, isn't kicking in. First of all, because they're not stopping and saying, now let me think, is pornography a good idea or not? No, because they're getting way too much pleasure from it, particularly when they masturbate to it. But also because that part of the brain very slowly develops over adolescence. It's not fully mature until around the mid-20s. Now, this means that around puberty, when the hormones are really coming on full stream, the sex hormones, kids are desperate to learn about sex, boys in particular. How do you do it? How do you be a good lover? And the girls are trying to learn what makes me attractive. Yeah. Does it mean having big boobs? Have I got to, look a particular way? And so because they're digital natives, they're looking to pornography, online material, to learn what sex is about. And it's not really teaching them what they need to learn.
Okay. So your research provides the basis for creating either conversations in the home or conversations in schools that can help inform kids on what's happening to them. I love what you said, that porn looks to kids like a great substitute. They don't know better, and it's really their brain that doesn't know better at that time, that it's just that biological connection. Maybe biological is not the right word, but it's just clicking in. It's instinctual. It's saying, this feels great, this looks good, and we think, well, kids won't look at that. Why would kids look at that? They don't even want to talk to us about sex, but they're seeing something, their brain is seeing something and responding to it.
Yeah. One of the things I want to say is around the science and why it's so important to know this isn't just a moralistic response to so much sexuality being out there, is that through the science, particularly the neuroscience, we're learning how internet pornography, because it's a supernormal stimulus, that over time it can lead to significant brain changes. And we'll come on to this when we talk about porn. But understanding the research is really important. Now, one of the other issues too is that that science isn't available to everybody. It costs usually about $40. That's US dollars. I don't know what the equivalent is in Canadian dollars. but it's about $40 per paper. And there are hundreds and hundreds of papers. Now, who can afford to fork out for that? Now, because we have access to universities, we can access those papers and we can read them and digest them. We can connect with the academics who wrote them and discuss them, and we can pull out the key parts and make that available to the public. It's a little bit what I used to do when I was a court lawyer. When I had complex matters to deal with, I would do all the research and pull out the salient points
Mm-hmm.
and make that understandable and simple for a jury. And in a way, dealing with parents is like you're dealing with a jury. They don't know about this stuff. But it's really important that they understand, as far as possible, without overwhelming anybody, why this is important because of its impact on the adolescent brain.
It's
One
so
of the
important. I just want to stop for a second because the pro porn side, I don't want to get too distracted, but they are so vocal and they make their arguments so compelling, so much so that we really have a culture that has accepted pornography. And if we have somebody who's trying to inform, the the Media Savvy Moms podcast or Parents Aware, and we don't have access to that information, or we go to access it and it's all in academic language.
Yeah, well, that's the other difficulty. Yeah.
We're so grateful that we have a voice that is disseminating this information in a way that we can access it.
Yeah. Well, porn, remember, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the headquarters of the biggest company, MindGeek, is where? Montreal.
Montreal.
So, and just like big tobacco back in the 50s and 60s, when the research started pointing to links between smoking and lung cancer, the big tobacco companies fielded scientists to say that smoking was harmless and that there was no causal link. And the same is happening with internet porn. And they have sexologists who are psychologists who deal with sexual health, but many of them either do not know about the brain or choose specifically to ignore it. There are some neuroscientists who are very pro porn, and they, for their own reasons, they choose to ignore the harms that it can do, particularly in excess. But the internet porn industry is using some of these sexologists to put out heavily flawed research to create a narrative that porn is not harmful. Now, most journalists don't know how to challenge that, despite the fact there's evidence from over 56 neurological papers that support porn as an addictive activity. And so if you've got a journalist with a pro-porn sexologist saying, oh, no, there's no harm, so it's only if there's an underlying issue, and people are just being moralistic, they're being religious fundamentalists, they'll blame the person, who is speaking, they'll shoot the messenger, because they never want porn itself to be seen. And some of these people, one guy in particular, a guy called David Lay, is a consultant to one of the biggest porn companies. And he says, oh, it's just a myth. Porn addiction's a myth. And, and it's just...
Meanwhile, he's being paid by the
porn industry to assure their users that they won't come to harm. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, the statistics are frightening, particularly in regard to erectile dysfunction, which we can come on to later. But all this leads... Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, when you have a journalist who interviews someone who says that porn is potentially harmful against another academic or scientist who says, oh, no, it's not, that just leaves doubt in the mind of the public. And the public say, well, if the experts can't decide if it's harmful or not, we'll just ignore the issue until we know for certain. But it took 20 years to amass enough evidence to make the public believe that smoking was a serious health hazard. Do we really want to wait 20 years to find out what risks there are for our children?
No, not at all. Okay, I want to go to that word addiction.
Okay.
If we can, because it's a loaded word, and it gets us in trouble sometimes, because if we say, oh, porn is addictive, then somebody else is saying, oh, no, it's not, you're using the wrong language, so let's throw at all the arguments you have. And we've had guests on the show who's said, oh, well, we can't use that word. And then we've had other guests on the show who experienced compulsion to use porn when they were teens and struggled for years to get over that. And they say, well, I I felt addicted, but I don't know if I can say that I was addicted. So, can you uncover that mystery for us? So, why are we being told to be cautious about it? And is there such a thing as internet porn addiction?
Yes.
Yes to both.
Yes to both. In 2018, the World Health Organization recognized a new disorder called compulsive sexual behavior disorder. And it's the first time that their International Classification of Diseases, version 11, ICD 11, recognized it.
Okay.
Now, the
I know,
description,
I just want
yeah,
to stop there. So, because what is the ICD-11 in plain speech?
yes, now that's what I was just about to
Oh,
explain. This is the bigger, it's okay. So the ICD 11 is a bigger and more worldwide manual of diseases than the American Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, or DSM 5, that may be better known. So ICD 11 introduced, which came out in 2018, that introduced gambling and gaming disorders as addictive disorders for the first time, but they put compulsive sexual behavior disorder into the impulse control disorders, which is a slightly lower category. Gaming and gambling was actually put in both categories. But some of the top neuroscientists and psychiatrists in the world who are dealing with problematic pornography, if you like, at a clinical level, say that other parts of the ICD 11 can be used to look to regard to diagnose compulsive porn use and compulsive masturbation as an addictive disorder. Now, the long definition of compulsive sexual behavior disorder does not use the word porn specifically in its, you know, definitions,
mhm.
but it is absolutely what it does do. I can read it out if you want, but it absolutely does link to what most people, the man in the street, would call an addictive disorder. 80% of people seeking treatment for compulsive sexual behavior disorder report problems related to out of control pornography use.
Well, that makes sense. And sometimes I think I don't need research to tell me this
Yeah.
because it seems so obvious, but we have to have the research or the statement.
Yes. Well, it's actually very important in countries where people have private health insurance. There's got to
Mm.
be a diagnostic category for a healthcare professional to charge to. So there are
It's
codes, so there are different
true. I had
codes.
not considered that.
Yes. So for insurance
Mhm.
purposes, you're not if you and sometimes the treatment that's recommended is very expensive treatment. So if you're relying on health insurance, you've got to have a recognised diagnosis. So that's why it is incredibly important, and why it was so important recently that some of the top clinicians who are dealing with behavioural addiction, dealing with pornography addiction, that they said that part of the other parts of the ICD 11 can be used to recognise pornography and masturbation as, when it's out of control, as an addictive disorder as such.
Okay.
Now, most young people are not really addicted to pornography.
All right.
In the
That's what I want
clinical,
to, that's really
yeah,
what I want to clarify. So let's focus on that for just a minute.
sure. So most of them are not addicted as such to pornography in the clinical sense, even if they feel that they may have developed problematic use. Addiction is a process that usually takes years to develop. One of the key definitions is an inability to stop despite negative consequences, such as losing a job or an important relationship, physical damage, or whatever. It involves binging on a substance or behaviour over a period of time, usually years. What happens more readily to young people is what's called sexual conditioning or sexual programming.
Well, just before we go into sexual conditioning, and I do want to talk about that, what I think that's so important to understand, our kids may feel addicted, but as parents, we're often concerned, oh, my child is involved in this habit, they're addicted, and we we start to get really fearful. Parents who have talked to me about their children's compulsive habits with porn, if they lived in fear, they couldn't connect with their children. So to understand that addiction is a process, it takes time. It doesn't minimize the impact that pornography is having on our kids, but it also reassures us that they're not beyond help and hope.
Exactly. And it's really important because why we know that children are less likely to be addicted rather than sexually conditioned is that many of them can recover when they quit porn. Not only do we have the information from the formal research in the scientific papers, of which there aren't nearly enough. I mean, this is still very early days. Mm-hmm. And it's quite hard sometimes to get access to children because in theory they're not supposed to be watching pornography because it's adult material, and that gets into all kinds of challenging areas. But
you have trouble doing ethical research.
Yes.
The way that the research community wants the research done.
Yes, you can't take 100 kids and take 50 or 200 kids and have 100 not watching any pornography at all over a number of years, and the other half looking at hardcore pornography every day. No ethical committee is going to give you,
nor do we want that to happen, right?
And nor do we want that to happen. So what we've been learning a lot about it is from the people who have quit porn. Mm-hmm. So the hundreds of thousands of guys on the websites, the porn recovery websites, I can talk about them a little bit later, is that they didn't realise they were addicted. They didn't realise they had problematic use quite often until they quit. But then the depression, the social anxiety, the brain fog, the inability to concentrate on their schoolwork, all that disappeared when they quit porn, or when they experimented with quitting porn, because they had no idea that was an issue. For those who developed erectile dysfunction or sexual dysfunctions, maybe inability to orgasm or delayed orgasm, they didn't know that was a problem when they were only using porn. It was only when they get with a partner and nothing works, or it's very sluggish, that they realise there might be an issue. Now, young men don't want to tell anybody that they've got a problem with their erections.
That would be terrifying.
Terrifying. It's the number one thing they fear most, probably, is impotence. So this has them rushing off to the internet to try and get Viagra or, all kinds of pills. And we're hearing about young men as young as late teens developing erectile dysfunction. But a lot of them don't know they've got erectile dysfunction or sexual dysfunctions because they're just using porn. They're not even trying to engage with real partners. They're getting all their jollies online for free. Why would you, risk rejection or paying out money to try and chat up a girl and get to know her, when you got all your sexual pleasures online?
It's only when they're older and ready to really have a relationship that they realize that there's a problem. All right. Yeah. Well, we are coming close to the end of our time together. So I want to make sure you hit the points that you want to hit most. We hinted that we were talking about sexual conditioning. Do you want to go back to that? Really, what I want to end with, you can touch on that, but what is the best course of action for a parent to take if their child is struggling? Because I remember a few years back, there was a report that came out, the NSPCC, do you know, that it was all the buzz in the UK papers for a while, that 10% of 12 to 13-year-olds believed that they were addicted to pornography. And that's alarming. So what do you do if a child feels that they're addicted, or as a parent, you're trying to help them from the reward perspective, from everything that we've talked about today? What's the best course of action that an individual can take to free themselves from pornography?
Right. Well, bear in mind, and I hope to soothe parents and not worry that even if their kids say they're addicted, they probably aren't addicted at this stage. They've developed sexual conditioning, which means they've sensitized their brains to pornography and to hyperarousal around anything that reminds them of past arousal. I mean, it is that first footprint in the snow, it's so imprinted. They just remember the huge pleasure from it, and they keep wanting to get that high again. And it's harder to get that high again, and that's why they keep looking for more and more material. So and pornography shapes sexual taste and can move consumers in unexpected and even undesired directions. They also develop desensitization, or an unpleasure response to everything else in their lives. Everything else is just boring compared to the excitement they find in ever novel porn videos. Now, this means that there's quite a lot parents can do, but the number one thing is education. Parents need to educate themselves about what pornography might be doing to the child's brain so that they can engage in a sensible, non-hysterical way, with a non-frightened way. I mean, parents must be worried sick about what's going on. So being educated is the main thing. Then getting your child educated about it. Now, kids do not want to talk to their parents about sex in general, and probably not porn in particular. But if a teen feels addicted to porn, or they've got out of control behaviour, then there are 5 approaches I would suggest. So in brief, they are book learning, online porn recovery self-help groups, individual or group coaching, formal counselling and psychotherapy for some who might need help with quitting, and technological tools to make it much more difficult to access porn. Now let me go into them in a little bit more detail. And I should say that these range from being free to moderately expensive. It really does matter. It depends on what you want or what's going to be best for your child. Self-help through book learning. Porn's now recognised as something that can easily lead eventually, as I've said, to an addiction. We recommend parents read Gary Wilson's book, Your Brain on Porn, Internet Pornography and the Emerging Science of Addiction, as a starting point. The book is basically an update on his hugely popular TEDx talk. And you can access even a free audiobook version on Gary's website, yourbrainonporn.com. Second, there's a number of free online porn recovery communities. The largest is nofap.com. And this one gives lots of free help, and they also have a proprietary coaching system through the NoFap Academy. There's a guy called Gabe Deem who has a very good website also called rebootnation.org, and he does coaching as well. There's another one if you want an experienced online coach, and we think Noah Church is a very good guy. He's very competent and capable, and his website is addictedtointernetporn.com, and he does lots of very good videos and talks, as does Gabe, about the different aspects of it. And there's a big, community on these websites. There's trained sex therapists. I mean, if your child is potentially on the autistic spectrum, it would be a really good idea if you could get them assessed formally, because they unfortunately are at a higher risk of developing an addiction later on. And you really want to educate them and be aware of what the risks are around that. We've actually got some, if you want to know more about the adolescent brain and specifically issues around autistic spectrum disorders or special learning needs, we've got some videos about that where I've done talks on our YouTube channel on the Reward Foundation website. The 5th area is if you need porn blocking technology or tools to help set up a relationship with an accountability partner, an organisation called Covenant Eyes is the market leader. So that's covenanteyes.com. But if you go to our free Parents Guide to Internet Pornography, we've got lots and lots of tips and information and video for parents to educate themselves and to also start having those challenging conversations with their children. But lots of tips and tools that might help them there.
We just love pointing parents to all these great resources. Thank you so much for everything you've shared with us today. As our listeners might gather, we could go on and on. We have barely scratched the surface. The Reward Foundation is able to direct you to so many other great resources. So I'm going to link to many of the things that Mary mentioned today, including that parent resource on their website, and really highly recommend that you check that out. So just a quick recap. We talked about it's so important to come at this topic from a public health issue rather than a moralistic or panicked issue. Porn does look to kids, and this is what I try to reinforce with parents all the time. These are not bad kids looking at porn. Porn looks to kids and kids' brains like a viable substitute for sexual information and sexual pleasure. Porn can lead to addiction. That's really important to understand, and so good that now I'm going to say it wrong, the ICD-11 recognizes it as such. But it's also important to know that teens are rarely addicted to pornography. There is great hope for their recovery if we get the information to them. And so that leaves us to, we're going to come back to a challenge, but we can educate ourselves and we can educate our kids. And there are resources to get help if it's beyond the scope of what we can do in our own home. So I'm going to turn it back to Mary, and she's going to leave us with a challenge for this week.
Okay, the challenge I would like to set parents is that they look at the Free Parents Guide to Internet Pornography that we have on our homepage, the rewardfoundation.org. And I'd like them to read as many of the tips and tools and look at as many of the videos as possible and to educate themselves. There's one item in particular that I would like to highlight, and I've asked you to put it on the list, which is to help parents deal with what's often called guilt affecting how they manage their child's screen time. Now, this is a brilliant article written by Dr. Victoria Dunkley that I've mentioned. She's a child psychiatrist who's written an excellent book about child screen time. She doesn't mention pornography in her book, but it is very relevant. And since most kids have problems often, it's not just with pornography, it's with gaming, it's with social media, it's with webcams, all kinds of things. So the book is very valuable and based on all the neuroscience. So the challenge is basically they look at that Free Parents Guide and read and ingest as many of the resources as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary, and your wealth of knowledge and information on this issue. We look forward to talking with you again sometime.
Thank you. I'd love to.
Thank you again for joining the conversation. If you'd like more information about what was discussed in this episode, visit our detailed show notes at parentsaware.info. And if you simply want to follow us on social media, we are at Media Savvy Moms on Instagram and parentsaware /Media Savvy Moms podcast on Facebook. Until next time, keep talking.